My name is Isaiah Zagar, and I was born at the Osteopathic Hospital at 69th or 64th Street and in Philadelphia. But several days after my birth, my parents left for Brooklyn, New York, where my mother's family lived. My mother was at the time, I think she was in her early 20s. My father was already 29, 31 years old. And when they moved, they drove a car. My father had a car. My father was a real aficionado of vehicles. I heard he was a fast driver. And they stopped at their cousin's house in Bridgeton, New Jersey. And I remember it. I remember being in Bridgeton, New Jersey, and being put down on a couch, and behind the couch was a plywood wall. The plywood was oak plywood, and it had spirals, because the way plywood is made is that it's cut from a tree, and it just moves. A big blade moves and just cuts and cuts and cuts, and so you see the underpinnings, the makings of the tree, and all these spirals. And I remember that, and I think that was very crucial to my art world and my life. That the spirals of the universe. The next time that I remember that was so important to my work is in Coney Island. My mother, we lived at Seagate, and my mother was a woman who wanted to be tan. She wanted to be the color brown, and so she was always taking me to the water's edge. And my father had this idea that I should be unafraid of the water. So my mother would sit me in the crook of her lap as she was tanning herself, and the water would go over me. And when the water or the waves would go over me, the detritus that was encased in the waves would flash by me and then fall to the sand on the ground, and fall each time perfectly in place. And I think that gave me the courage to put one tile next to the other in all kinds of random orders, and I would realize it was okay, it was perfect. Because each time that the ocean wave would bring detritus into the air, that would be sand and pieces of crab claws and pieces of shells. As they would be placed on the ground, they would be in perfect placement, and then of course they'd be washed away, and the next wave would come over me. And I used to scream. That's what my mother told me. And she had feared that I was afraid, and my father would say, "Well, no, keep him by the water." And I don't think I was afraid. I think I was excited by what I was seeing. Now, the third representation here that's important to me in terms of my spiritual growth and my artistic growth is a picture of my mother, and it says winter coat. Every 2 years, my mother would get a new coat, and she would choose a winter coat that was a primary color, and each time she chose a color that was opposite the last 2 years. So if she had a green one year, the next year would be a pink or a red, and the following year would be a blue. And each 2 years, these color accumulations seem to me, in retrospect, to be very important to my, in quotes, garish color sense. The next a piece would be the piece with my young parents and me, and the names names of my mother and father and my 2 sisters. And I have 1948, but probably around that time was important as I was in the Young Israel of Bedford Bay and studying Torah. And my teacher, main teacher, was a man named Rabbi Belsky. And Rabbi Belsky was a real prototype of the Eastern European Jewish rabbi. He had a long beard, and he wore a big black coat, and he was pretty much overweight. And he was very, very well attuned to the Torah and felt that I could be a scholar. And he was really interested in me going to yeshiva. But I was more interested in getting the money from my bar mitzvah so that I could spend it. That's what I wanted to do. And I had no real interest in religion as such, but I loved the stories. The next most important moment in my life was, in many ways, in terms of art, was in many ways the great tragedy of my life, because I had a nervous breakdown in 1968 where I attempted suicide. Now, fortunately for me and my family, and maybe for Philadelphia, and maybe for more than Philadelphia, I was unsuccessful. But it allowed me to start over again as an artist, and that's when mosaics entered into the picture. And the mosaics entered into the picture through the auspices of Dr. Morton Herskowitz, a prominent orgonomist in the city of Philadelphia, a man who's now 93 and who I see every once in a while still, because I need overhaul sometimes. and he is very gracious and at any moment in time when I need him, he's there for me. Of course, he's on vacation right now, but I have Wendy. So 1968, I had that nervous breakdown, and I didn't know whether I could be an artist anymore. And Herskowitz said, well, the thing you have to do is you just have to work. So, well, working at painting is not so much a 9 to 10 to 12-hour job. I mean, it just isn't that way. You know, there's a lot of what's called thinking and ruminating. There's a wonderful photograph that I saw in Life magazine of Jackson Pollock, and he's sitting on a stool, and he's smoking away, and the smoke is curling all around him. What he's sitting and doing is looking at a work critically. He is making judgments about that work of art that you don't see, but he wants to make changes. And that's not the kind of thing that I'm very interested in changing what I've already done and going over it and erasing from that time, because what I had decided was that I lost all sense of judgment, and I could only keep going. And the mosaics, although it wasn't really mosaics at first, it was assemblage, it was collage, using whatever materials came at hand, and it was working on a grand scale, a scale such that I couldn't think about the confines of the work and the perfectness of the work. What was more important for me was the sprawlingness, and the workflow. And so my life changed radically, and my artwork changed radically, and I was able to harness energies and keep those energies going. I mean, I'm now 72 years old, and I try to work every day.